Great. Good morning, everybody. We're just going to give folks another minute or so to join. We had quite a few people registered for our session this morning, so make sure we get everyone in. All right. Great. Well, it's 10 o'clock. We'll continue to let folks in as they join, but we want to make sure we have plenty of time to get through all of our material today. So, welcome. My name is Adrienne Harrison, and I serve as the Catalyst Program Manager for the Northern Border Regional Commission. And we're here today to talk about the Catalyst program and specifically about some of the New York State priorities as well. So we're joined today by Kyle Wilbur, who will chime in later on this morning with information about the state role in reviewing pre-applications. So we're really excited that he could be here today. And I'll remind everyone that this session is being recorded. It will be made available on our website later today. So the recorded webinar, along with the slides we go over today, as well as all of the question and answers that go on in our chat box, those will all be made available as resources as we move through or later on today after we're done here. I will ask that everyone feel free to use the chat box to share their questions along the way. We have Andrea Smith with us today. She's our NBRC program director, and she, along with one of our program specialists and local development district specialist, Sarah Lang, they will be available monitoring our chat box and making sure we get answers to your questions or highlight questions that might be of benefit for everyone to hear responses to. Let's see. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. Okay, so once again, we're here to talk about the Catalyst program. It's really exciting to be here. We're going to plan to go over broadly the details of our 2024 Catalyst program, as well as dig into a lot of details around eligibility for NBRC funding and the Catalyst program. We're also going to really spend a lot of time on the pre-application itself, the timeline, the process, the required information, and how pre-applications will be evaluated. And we'll end with kind of what's next for you as an interested applicant and in terms of information coming from NBRC. Again, with lots of time for questions and answers. So again, use that chat box and we'll pause throughout our session today to invite live Q&A as well. Okay, so the Catalyst program, this is our second year of running the Catalyst program at NBRC. It's really an exciting program. Last year, we were able to award 65 awards across our four-state region, totaling nearly $44 million. So that was a really impressive round of funding, some really exciting projects that came out of the competition, and we can't wait to see what this year brings. The purpose of the Catalyst program is to stimulate economic growth and inspire partnerships that improve rural economic vitality in the NBRC region. Really, the Catalyst program is an economic development funding opportunity. And so at the base of all the cool things that we're able to fund, it's really aimed at improving the economies within our region. And for those that may not be familiar with examples of the types of projects that have been funded through the Catalyst program in the past, this program, while it's not limited to these types of projects, some of the more common projects that are funded include water and wastewater systems, transportation infrastructure, workforce development programs and facilities, outdoor recreation infrastructure, as well as new childcare and healthcare facilities. So in 2024, there are some exciting changes from our 2023 round of funding. There are also a lot of things that are the same. So I will attempt to highlight when things are the same and when things are a little different this year in 2024. This year, NBRC anticipates making a minimum of $50 million available for the 2024 Catalyst program. And the reason we say minimum, we still do not yet have our federal fiscal year 2024 budget. That's in process. And we anticipate making additional funds available if possible through the Catalyst program in 2024. So if we are able to revise the available funds, we will issue a revised program announcement. But I wanted everyone to be aware that we do not yet have our 2024 federal budget in place yet. So these numbers could change. And you'll notice this year, compared to previous years, we're offering two funding rounds. This is one of those really exciting changes that NBRC is, you know, happy to be able to bring forward. And that is really the flexibility associated with offering two funding rounds. So we have a spring funding round, which we will focus on today. And we also have a second funding opportunity scheduled for the fall. And this is really, like I said, we're really excited about this flexibility. I think it's, supportive of projects that might not quite be ready and fully baked right now to meet our spring deadlines. Gives more time for project development, for developing partnerships to make these projects a success. So, if you don't feel your project is fully ready for a pre-application in March, there is no reason to not be just as excited to put your pre-application in for the fall funding round. Okay. The other change is we are now having a pre-application process. Previously, we called the pre-application a letter of interest. They're very similar. There are some differences, and again, we'll go through those. But just in case folks are familiar with that letter of interest process, it's no longer a letter of interest, it's a pre-application. And pre-applications, just as letters of interest are required to receive an invitation to apply for Catalyst funding. We'll talk about the timeline for these pre-applications. They are due March 15th in the spring round and September 6th for the fall round. We require that the pre-applications be submitted using our online grants management system. And yet another really exciting change at NBRC is we will have a brand new online grants management system available for this year. And we will again touch base on this during our talk today. Another change is all of the potential waivers that are associated with you as an applicant or your project are required at the pre-application stage. We will go through each of those waivers that may apply to your project. But a difference is that they are all required at the pre-application when you submit your pre-application. There are no waivers that are accepted after the pre-application. And as I mentioned before, we're going to have time to talk about how we review your pre-applications and what happens after you submit your pre-application. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into eligibility. There are really 3 points of eligibility for you all to understand as you develop your project. The first is the location of you as the applicant and your project. Um, all of NBRC funds must go to our NBRC service area. So, or to our member states, and our service area is made up of 60 counties across the 4 states. Those are listed in our enabling legislation. You can see there's quite a few counties in New York. Um, and so that those counties make up our NBRC service area in New York. And then the next piece of eligibility is if that county is eligible to receive NBRC and Catalyst program funds. So each of those counties are annually assessed for the level of economic and demographic distress. NBRC uses a series of distress criteria to evaluate each of the counties. The primary categories include the percent of population below the poverty level, unemployment rates, and the percent change in population. We also look at things like the percent of population with a bachelor's degree or higher, the median household income, and the percent of secondary or seasonal homes. So that gives you an idea of what we're looking at when we're going through and assessing each county for distress. At the end of that assessment, a county is designated as either distressed, transitional, or attainment. And those designations are what determines eligibility for NBRC funding, as well as the reimbursement and match ratio a project is eligible for. So a distressed county is eligible for an 80% reimbursement and a 20% match ratio. Transitional county is eligible for a 50% reimbursement and 50% match ratio. And an attainment county is ineligible to receive NBRC funding unless one of 3 exceptions apply. And those exceptions are outlined here. I'll briefly walk through them. The first is if an area has been identified as an isolated area of distress. So all of those same distress criteria I just touched on are applied to each municipality within an attainment county. And if one of those municipalities meets the criteria, it is identified as an isolated area of distress and is eligible to receive NBRC funding at the 50% reimbursement and 50% match ratio. The second exception is a significant benefits exception. So a project that is not located in a distressed or transitional county, if it's located or an isolated area of distress, that can bring benefits to the surrounding distressed and transitional counties, is eligible to apply for funds by submitting, well, sorry, they're not eligible for funding. They're eligible to submit a significant benefits waiver. And that waiver asks the applicant to describe the benefits that would accrue to the distressed or transitional counties. And then that waiver request is reviewed by the NBRC federal co-chair, as well as the 4 state alternates. And if that's approved, that project becomes eligible for NBRC funding. The third exception to receive NBRC funds within an attainment county is if that county is part of a multi-county or multi-state project that also includes at least one distressed or transitional county. So a quick review of determining your eligibility, your project's location eligibility, and your eligibility for the match reimbursement ratio You're going to want to make sure your project is in the NBRC service area. Check to see what the designation of that county is, if it's distress, transitional, or attainment. If it's attainment, again, you're going to want to determine if an exception applies or if you need to submit that significant benefits waiver, which is required at the pre-application phase. And then you're going to want to confirm what your reimbursement and match ratio is associated with that location. This is the first of many times I'm going to point you towards our Catalyst Program User Manual as a resource. If you have not yet found where that manual exists or lives, it's available on nbrc.gov. And if you navigate to the program areas page, click on the Catalyst program. At the bottom of the Catalyst program page is where all of our important resources for the program live. So you can find the program user manual there. It has a lot of details, all of the details I'm going over here today and some. So that's your primary resource. If you're interested in the distress criteria, you can also find that on our website. The distress criteria for 2024 is available on our nbrc.gov site. Okay, so the third point of eligibility is whether or not you're an eligible applicant or co-applicant. And we've highlighted here are eligible applicants, state governments, local governments, subdivisions of state. So sometimes we get questions on what is included there. We have regional planning commissions, authorities of state, which may include public school districts, tribes, federally recognized tribes, as well as tribal nonprofits are eligible for NBRC funds, and all nonprofit entities. So all organizations designated with a 501c. For-profit entities, LLCs, other entities that are not a 501c are not eligible for NBRC funds, as well as any applicants from outside of an NBRC member state. So our member states, again, are Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and of course, New York. If your organization is from outside of those member states, you're not eligible to apply for NBRC funds. One other element of eligibility we look at associated with the applicants or co-applicants is whether or not you've had a previous award with NBRC, and if that award is still open or active, we will look to confirm if that award has both submitted reimbursement requests totaling 75% or more and demonstrated that 75% of the cost share or match has been spent before the pre-application deadline. So if you do have an open award with NBRC, you're going to want to go ahead and confirm the status of your reimbursement and spend down of your cost share. If you have not met that 75% expenditure requirement, you can apply for a waiver. This waiver must be submitted with your pre-application, and generally it asks for you to describe the status and progress of your award. That waiver is approved by the state program manager. So you're going to want to have a conversation with them as well. And the final waiver that may apply to your project and would need to be submitted with a pre-application is the local development district waiver. All Catalyst program awards require the use of a local development district for grant administration services. Those services could include things like support with quarterly reporting, reimbursement requests, assistance with procurement processes. There's an exception for state government entities and LDDs themselves. Those organizations are already exempt from the LDD administration requirement. Some organizations with the capacity for managing federal grants may be interested in applying for an LDD waiver. And this must again be submitted at the time of pre-application. Otherwise, you will be asked to put 2% of your NBRC award amount in your budget for working with LDDs on grant administration. Okay, moving into the eligible categories for projects of the Catalyst program. Um, we have generally sort of two bins of project categories. We have infrastructure project categories and non-infrastructure project categories. These are really well defined, along with a lot of examples in our Catalyst program user manual. So I'm not going to read our definitions because I think they're each like half a page long, and let you check those out in our manual. We have basic public infrastructure, transportation, renewable energy, and telecommunications within our infrastructure project categories. And then we have business and workforce development, basic healthcare, and resource conservation, recreation, and tourism within our non-infrastructure categories. And I'm going to spend some time discussing how you would classify your project to fit within one of those categories. It's really important for you to understand how your project would be classified because that is how we determine the maximum award size for your project. Non-infrastructure projects have a maximum award size of $500,000. Infrastructure projects have a maximum award size of $1 million. There's also a higher maximum infrastructure award, which we'll walk through where your project may be eligible for up to $3 million in a maximum award size. And I'll highlight another resource we have available on our page is the frequently asked questions document. And these project classification sort of decision support questions I walk through are all there as well. And of course, they'll be in these slides after today's presentation. Okay, so you think you might have an infrastructure project. You're going to want to ask yourself these two questions. Does the proposed project align with an infrastructure category? And is the proposed project primarily construction? If you answer yes to both of these questions, the project is considered infrastructure by NBRC and you're eligible for the $1 million maximum award size. You'll also want to check to see if the higher maximum infrastructure determination applies, and we'll walk through that. However, if you answer no to one or both of those questions, the project would be considered non-infrastructure by NBRC with a maximum award size of up to $500,000. Sometimes it's lost in our terminology that the infrastructure categories require construction in support of those infrastructure categories. And so that's why it's really important to be able to answer, yes, the project is a primarily construction project. So if you do have an infrastructure project, these are the two questions you'll want to ask about your project to determine if you are eligible for the higher maximum infrastructure award. Those are, does the infrastructure project include construction in 2 or more jurisdictions? And by jurisdictions, we mean municipalities, which could be villages, towns, cities. Jurisdictions could also mean counties or states. So if there is construction happening in 2 or more jurisdictions, then your project would be eligible for the higher infrastructure determination. The other question to ask is, does the infrastructure project include construction in support of one of 2 or more infrastructure categories? So we'd go back to that list of the infrastructure project categories, and if your project is including construction that supports 2 or more of those categories, then it would be eligible for a higher maximum award size. So again, if your answer to one or both of these questions is yes, it's eligible for up to $3 million. If you answer no to both of these questions, the project is eligible for that $1 million infrastructure maximum award size. You think you may have a non-infrastructure project. It wasn't an infrastructure project, so you're looking to the non-infrastructure project categories. Um, Essentially, you ask yourself if the project aligns with one of those categories. Again, really well defined in our user manual. If you answer yes, the project is considered non-infrastructure with a $500,000 maximum. And I will walk through this in a couple slides. But if you do have a project in the basic healthcare or an outdoor recreation project, you're going to want to check our expanded basic public infrastructure determination. And I'll go through that in a minute. But say you say no, your project does not align with a non-infrastructure category. And it also is not aligning with an infrastructure category, then you're going to want to take a step back. Catalyst may not be the right program for your project. So that could be the outcome of the project classification as well. Now, if you do have a non-infrastructure project in the basic healthcare or outdoor recreation project categories, we expanded our definition of the basic public infrastructure category in 2023. And so construction in support of basic healthcare or outdoor recreation would be considered an infrastructure project and would be eligible for up to the $1 million maximum award size. If you answer no, it's not primarily construction, then it would be considered the non-infrastructure project. So I hope that helps to clarify the questions that we go through at NBRC when we're looking at your projects and determining if they're infrastructure or non-infrastructure, and helps to clarify when a project may be eligible for that higher maximum award size, or when a non-infrastructure project may actually be eligible to receive when a healthcare or outdoor recreation project may be eligible as an infrastructure project. We can always, help you walk through those questions as well if you continue to have any questions about how your project would be classified. Okay, I'm going to walk through a few of the policies and requirements that come with NBRC awards and funding. And again, I'll refer you to our user manual. I'll also highlight another resource that you may not have found yet. That is the NBRC Grant Administration and Compliance Manual. That resource has a lot of information about our procurement processes, the NEPA process, receiving a notice to proceed so that you can begin to spend your funds for the project. A lot of the things I talk about in the next few slides are available there, and is a great resource in terms of planning your project budget and your project timeline. Okay, so we talked a little bit about understanding how you know which reimbursement and match ratio applies to your project. Again, that depends on the location and the designation of the county you're in. I'll highlight that the NBRC awards are reimbursements. And so that means the grantee would, make purchases or spend the funds and then request a reimbursement from NBRC, which requires you to show the documentation associated with the project NBRC funds, as well as your match and cost share funds, as part of that reimbursement request. When you're calculating your minimum match requirements, The match is calculated off of the NBRC requested amount. So you'll multiply that match rate of either 20%, 50%, or if you're part of a multi-county or multi-state project, you may have an averaged match rate. You'll multiply that match rate times your requested NBRC funding amount, and that will be your required minimum match. You'll also see the term cost share a lot. We recognize that a lot of projects require funds above and beyond the NBRC requested amount. And so you'll hear cost share, which references all of the project costs that are not NBRC funds. Um, this may be in addition to the minimum match requirement. And so to calculate your cost share, that is the total project cost minus NBRC requested funds. It's important to understand how your match and cost share will be or how you'll make up those sources of funds at the time of pre-application. And we'll walk through this later this morning, but you will be asked as part of the pre-application to highlight your match and cost share sources so that we know you have a plan for those total project costs to be met with other sources. And a reminder that both match and NBRC funds cannot be committed or spent before receiving a notice to proceed. A few more funding items with our awards. NBRC has a 3-year performance period. So that means we anticipate or we expect that your project will be completed within a 3-year time period. And that's important to note because if your project cannot be completed within that 3-year period of performance, NBRC suggests delaying that pre-application to a future funding round so that it would be able to be completed within that 3-year period. And I'll note that anyone that may have worked with Catalyst or with our former SEID program, our 3-year period of performance typically started on October 1st. This year, since we have 2 funding rounds, we're looking at award start dates or project performance start dates of roughly September 1st for the spring awards and of roughly January 1st for the fall awards. Those are definitely not set in stone yet, but we're anticipating those as the beginning of those those performance periods for those projects, for those funding rounds. NBRC funds, we already talked about how for-profit entities are not eligible applicants, but NBRC funds can also not go to a for-profit entity as part of the award. So we do not allow for pass-throughs from an eligible applicant to a for-profit entity. There's a list of other ineligible purposes, but that one comes up a lot when we're working with interested applicants in terms of questions about can funds go to for-profit entities. Program income, this doesn't apply to all of our projects, but sometimes we have projects that have program income, and this can be a difference from one federal agency to another. NBRC treats program income in what we call the deductive method, which essentially means that program income is subtracted from the total program costs. So if you do have program income for your project, you're going to want to check out how we treat that source of income. A cool thing about NBRC funds, you may use NBRC funds to match other federally funded projects. And we do have an 80% federal funding ceiling, which I'll touch on again. So only up to 80% of the total project costs can come from federal funding sources, but we do allow our funds to match other federally funded projects. And NBRC funds can be used to purchase or construct real property. Um, with that comes a federal interest in that property for 20 years. So if your project does include the purchase of land, the purchase of a building, or the construction of a building, you'll want to consider that federal interest, that 20-year federal interest period in your project. Ineligible costs, a few items that come up often for Catalyst projects questions. NBRC funds cannot go towards maintenance, so routine or deferred maintenance. NBRC funds can also not be used to pay debts or to incur debts. And again, there's a list of additional ineligible costs in our user manual, but those two come up pretty frequently as questions for Catalyst projects. You heard me use the term notice to proceed a couple times already this morning. This is a unique component of NBRC funds. Not all agencies have this notice to proceed requirement. Well, I guess they call it something different. But so NBRC funds and match cannot be committed or spent before receiving this official permission from NBRC, this notice to proceed, which essentially says NBRC has we've worked with you and all of our federal requirements have been met, and now these funds are yours to access. And as part of the process to receive the notice to proceed, environmental review of the project needs to be completed. So the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, applies to NBRC funds. And while it's not necessarily super important for you to know exactly the environmental review process of your project right now, in terms of planning for your timeline and planning for a budget for your project, we like to highlight the potential situations your project may be in for environmental review early on so that you can really plan again for that timeline and potential budget associated with it. So typically Catalyst projects fall within one of three situations. One is a categorical exclusion. Typically projects that do not have any construction or renovation or in the ground disturbance can fit within a categorical exclusion category. And these are, projects like our workforce training programs, any sort of programming project would likely fit a categorical exclusion. And these are relatively quick environmental review processes and approvals, and they typically don't have, any significant dollars associated with them. So another situation is your project does fit a categorical exclusion, but also there may be an additional consultation required with the Historic Preservation Office in your state. And that may take a little longer. So if your project does include historic resources, you're going to want to plan for a little bit more time, potentially some funds available for any sort of historic resource documentation or requirements that may come from that consultation. So for planning and budget purposes, these are our estimates a few months and potentially $1,000 to $3,000. And the most intense environmental review process that we typically see with catalyst projects is the environmental assessment. And that can take from 6 to 12 months. And we would give an estimate of $5,000 to $10,000. And this is really for projects that are, construction, in the ground disturbances, potentially a major renovation. And so if you have a project that fits into that sort of definition of use, you'll want to, for planning purposes, have this timeline and this budget in mind. NBRC provides a lot more detailed guidance on how to move through the NEPA environmental review process when you receive an award. But again, just for planning purposes and awareness purposes, we like to highlight this potential early on in the process. And again, I did mention the federal funding ceiling earlier. NBRC has an 80% federal funding ceiling. Again, no more than 80% of the total project costs can come from federal sources. We also often get questions about what counts as a federal funding source. So some items that do not count towards the federal cap, HUD's Community Development Block Grant from your state does not count towards the federal cap. Federal loans also do not count towards the federal cap. And another sort of string that may apply to the funds for your project from NBRC is the Build America, Buy America Act from 2021. This was essentially a Buy American preference for iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials used in infrastructure projects. And the Build America, Buy America Act does have a broad definition of infrastructure projects. So if you do receive an award, a Catalyst Award, NBRC will work with you so that you understand if this applies to your project. If you're interested in learning more, we do have a BABA website linked as part of the Northern Border Regional Commission website. It's linked here. It's on the top of our page. There's a little menu item that says BABA. So you can learn more about NBRC's BABA implementation policies. Okay, that was a lot of information. I'm going to pause and before we dive into the pre-application and see if there are any questions on any of the items that I touched on in the first section of our webinar today.
Adrian, I have a few for you if you're ready.
Sure, thanks, Sarah.
As far as the federal cap, John was asking, does federal tax credits count towards the 80% cap?
I actually don't know. Andrea, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, so federal tax credit, yes, that's federal cap. And there was a question about bill money. That is also considered federal, unless it's coming through a municipality. So for instance, some bill money was direct and that counts as federal, where coming through a municipality's general fund, we have counted that as state or local funding. It's, as Adrian said, it's federal grant money. So it's both our award and any other federal source. And probably important to note that not all federal funders allow other federal funding to be a match. So always important to know who else is in the funding stack. I can address the earmark question too. So the earmark funds, those are also those are eligible and also considered federal.
Great. A question that was asked early on in the presentation that might be applicable to everyone on this call is, can the same project be submitted for fall award? If it's not accepted or not awarded, could it be considered to be submitted in the next round? And essentially, you know, we would recommend that an eligible project that's not invited to apply the first time around connect with their state program manager to discuss the project and get some feedback before resubmitting. So that question has come up a few times in our presentations this week.
Yeah, we will talk about that as part of this pre-application portion of our webinar today. But yes, you would need to resubmit for a pre-application for a future funding round. It would potentially, I mean, depending on feedback, would still be eligible to apply for a future funding round. But we will talk about the types of responses you'll hear in a few slides.
Another question is,
Adrian, while we're sort of on
Sure.
sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. No, you go ahead, Andrea.
I was just going to say, I see a lot of questions about what is eligible for matching cost share. We included in the chat a link to our grant administration and compliance manual, and there is a section of that manual that specifically talks about what can be counted as matching cost share, because we do allow volunteer and in-kind match, which not all federal funders do. So if you want some further guidance on matching cost share, which we talk about in this session, but isn't really the primary focus, that's a great place for some guidance on what we consider as eligible match. There were, I think, 5 or 6 questions about that. So I wanted to make sure people knew there was a resource to try to address those questions as we sort of work our way through the presentation.
The next question, Adrian, I know you touched on this a little bit earlier on in the presentation, but I guess this just gets into more detail. Is there an equal amount of funding set aside for spring and fall rounds, or will the fall funding round be limited by whatever funds are left over?
Right, that's a great question. As of right now, we have a minimum of $30 million available in the spring round and a minimum of 20 million available in the fall round. So right now they're not exactly equal. That could change again depending on our fiscal year 2024 budget allocation. But that's where it stands right now. It's not just what's left over. We do have a dedicated amount for each funding round.
Great, thank you. Another question that just came through, can more than one project be applied for in a funding period? I'm assuming they mean, can an eligible entity apply for multiple projects in one round?
So we don't have a rule against an organization submitting more than one pre-application. You know, it's not likely an organization will have multiple pre-applications selected or multiple applications selected. So we really encourage you to, you know, submit your strongest application or pre-application. But we do not have a rule against submitting multiple pre-applications. It's just strongly encouraged that you pick the one that's most important to you. This is consistently an oversubscribed program, meaning we have many more millions of dollars requested than we have available. And so, you know, essentially you may just be competing against yourself. And so we really want you to put forward your best pre-application.
Great, that's all the questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to give people a chance to unmute or if you want to move on.
Yeah, if anyone has a a question that they want to highlight, we can take, one or two live. Okay. Well, I think everyone's making great use of the chat, so keep that going, and we'll take another break for questions as we move through. Okay, so I think really why we're all here is to talk about the pre-application details. And so I'm just going to dive right in. Again, we'll be focusing on the spring timeline because that's coming right up. We're in it. Here we are in the program information sessions. The online pre-application system will be opening later this month or the first week in March. And we are, all of the pre-applications are due March 15th by 5 p.m. I like to highlight that we do have a 5 p.m. Eastern deadline. A lot of other funding opportunities have 11:59 p.m. But we have at NBRC at 5 p.m., so that's really important to note. Of course, I encourage everyone to not wait until 5 p.m. to submit your pre-applications. Please feel free to submit them early, so you're not hit with any last minute snafus that might come your way. So definitely plan on submitting early if you can. But if you are more of a submit at the final hour, please be aware that it is 5 p.m. Again, all waivers that may apply to your project are also due by 5 p.m. on March 15th. And then we'll talk about the review process and the review timeline, but all pre-applications will be receiving a response from NBRC during the week of March 25th. I have been saying it could be March 29th. So if you don't hear anything on March 25th, you haven't missed anything. But we do have that week scheduled to be providing responses back. So if you haven't heard from us by the end of day on March 29th, then maybe feel free to check in with us. But we will be getting responses back to you that week. In the process for submitting the pre-application, again, we have a new online grants management system, and all pre-applications must be submitted using that system. We will be making detailed guidance available for accessing that system. The system will require you to register for an account, and we'll be providing guidance on how to do that. And then, of course, once you're in the system, you'll access our pre-application questions, and we will also provide guidance on how to use the system and respond to those questions. Today, though, we'll be going through the information that will be asked in the registration and within the application. And so as part of your registration process, the system will ask about your organization. Essentially, your organization name, address, contacts, as well as the organization type. So you'll have that eligible applicant list to select from and let us know which type of eligible applicant your organization is. Your employer identification number. The system will also ask for your unique entity ID or your UEI number. And this is something that is not required to submit a pre-application, but will be required to receive an award from NBRC. So to receive federal funding, you'll need a UEI number. If you have one, enter it when you're registering. If you don't have one, that would be a great time for you to go ahead and sign up for a UEI number. I believe all federal funders require a UEI, and you can get one for free on sam.gov. You can register there. So if you don't have one, that would be a good time to go ahead and register for one so you have one available in the case that you're selected for funding. Okay, so you've registered for an account. Now you'll be able to access the pre-application, and we're going to walk through most of the information that will be asked of you in the pre-application. Um, you'll be asked about some characteristics of you as an applicant in terms of your organization and your project. First is about if you have previously received an award from NBRC. And if yes, it will ask you for the NBRC award number. That's, to help us be able to track the number of first-time applicants we're seeing, as well as to confirm that 75% expenditure requirement. You'll also be asked if your organization and project are serving a rural community, which NBRC defines as a community with a population of less than 5,000. And you'll be asked if your organization or project is serving an underserved community. And we have defined that term in our program user manual. And I will note that it is a broader definition than we used in 2023. You'll be asked to share the primary place of performance. So really, where will this project happen? Not necessarily the address of your organization's office, but the location of where the project will physically take place. So you'll be asked the address of where the project will occur, including the zip code, the county. I think you'll even have an option for putting in your lat and long coordinates, so you can get as detailed as you'd like. You'll also be asked for your project title. We don't provide, a requirement on how the title should be formatted. Typically, Catalyst projects have the name of the organization and, the primary purpose of the project in the title. So, like Town of Somewhere's wastewater treatment plant would be a typical project title. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little. It's Friday. I've been talking a lot. The pre-application will also ask for the budget information for your project. And there's two components to the budget at the pre-application phase. The first is the budget narrative. The budget narrative is a text box within the pre-application system, and you will be asked to describe expenses over $5,000 by category, and we'll go through those categories. There also will be a table within that text box where you can describe your match sources. So remember earlier I was talking about the importance of understanding the makeup of your match and cost share. You'll be asked for the source. So the name of the match source, if it's federal or non-federal, the type, meaning if it's a grant or a loan or another type of funding source, and the status of that match source. So if it's committed or secured and the date of that commitment, or if it's pending and the expected date of that commitment. You'll also be asked for a detailed budget, which will allow you to show us how the funds will be allocated across the budget categories, and also how NBRC funds will be allocated and how your match and cost share funds will be allocated. And so here are those budget categories that will be available to you. Each of these lines within the budget you'll be able to, enter multiple lines within each category. And so, and then it will total up to your total project costs. And if you're familiar with the SF 424 CBW, these budget categories align with the categories in that form. Something, something different this year is that the pre-applications do not require you to submit the SF424 CBW, but we are asking again for those budget categories. I'm just going to take 1 second and get a sip of water. I did not bring a glass to my desk, so I apologize for that. I will be right back. I apologize. Okay, so sorry about that. Hopefully my voice will hold up. Okay, so the SF424 CBW, like I said, is not required this year at the pre-application stage. It will be required at the application stage. And so that's why we really are encouraging the alignment with the categories. Um, and if you have any questions about what costs go into which category, we will have that guidance in our Catalyst program user manual under the pre-application information. Okay, so we've got some information about your organization as the applicant. We have the budget information. We also have a series of narrative questions in the pre-application, and those are where you will be able to describe your project, your outcomes, and really what we need to know about your project when we're reviewing them. Each of the narrative questions have a text box that have a 10,000 character limit, as well as formatting and editing capabilities. Um, Sometimes it's hard to know what 10,000 characters really means, but it's like 2 to 3 pages of space. So it's quite a bit of space for you to be able to tell us about your projects. And I am encouraging folks to go ahead and develop your responses within a word processing document so that you can copy and paste that information right into those text boxes. And I just mentioned that we are updating our Catalyst program user manual with this information. So right now, if you've reviewed the user manual, the part 2 pre-application section does not yet have this information there. So right now, this presentation is the most detailed guidance we have available about the pre-application questions, but we are actively currently updating that user manual, and we'll have that out as soon as we can with this information. Okay, so the first narrative question is the project abstract, and this is where you provide a summary of your proposed project, and you'll describe the project category that your project falls within, describe the status of the project in terms of is it ready to go? Are there still some planning tasks to complete? And or is it already ongoing and these are kind of the final funds needed to complete the project? What is the overall project scope? What are the tasks and activities? And over what period of time will the project be completed? The second narrative is project goals, outcomes, and outputs. And this is where you'll highlight the expected economic outcomes of your project, as well as the scale of the expected economic impacts on your community, county, or region. If you are not familiar with the types of economic outcomes NBRC looks at, we have a list of examples in Appendix G, the user manual. And this will give you an idea of the kinds of things that we're looking for projects to have as outcomes. The third narrative is the program investment priorities. This is your opportunity to describe how your project aligns with both NBRC investment priorities as well as the state program priorities. And we'll hear from Kyle in a few minutes, some information about New York's program priorities and New York's role in the evaluation of pre-applications. You can find our program priorities again in that program user manual. There's NBRC investment priorities, and the state scoring criteria is where you will find the New York priorities. The fourth narrative question is project beneficiaries and community context. Again, the opportunity here is to describe who will benefit from this project and why this project matters to the community. If it's applicable, you can highlight how this project serves or benefits rural communities or underserved communities, as well as highlight, if it's applicable, how this project supports increasing community resilience to climate and weather impacts. And the final narrative question is the statement of need. And this is where you can highlight the challenge or problem your project seeks to address, as well as the proposed solution, why this project is important, the opportunity that is gained by funding this project now, and why NBRC funding is important to this project. This is also where we would ask you to describe how the project meets the higher maximum infrastructure criteria. So if you have gone through those project classification questions and determined your project is in fact eligible for the higher maximum award size, we ask that you describe how it meets that criteria and how those funds will be allocated across either the 2 or more infrastructure categories or across the 2 or more jurisdictions. Okay, so you've made it through the pre-application, you've registered, you've given information about your organization as an applicant, you've given your budget information, and you've responded to all of those narrative questions. You've hit submit, and now it's in the hands of NBRC and the state program manager. And we will again be evaluating these pre-applications within that 2-week window. And NBRC will be looking at both eligibility and alignment with NBRC priorities. And the states will be looking at alignment with state priorities. We'll also be looking at the costs and expected benefits associated with the requested NBRC funding and the benefits provided to the broader community and region. And those are all things that we've asked you to describe in those narrative questions. And we'll also be looking to the budget to verify the costs and how they're allocated across your project. These are the NBRC Catalyst program priorities, and a couple of them probably already look a little familiar because we've been integrating them into our program. The first is prioritizing projects that demonstrate benefits to rural communities and underserved communities. Prioritizing projects that address multiple needs and can demonstrate efficiencies gained by including multiple categories in one project, as well as prioritizing projects that can support community resilience to climate and weather impacts. Okay, I'm going to invite Kyle to go ahead and come off mute if he's available, and to talk a little bit about New York's program a role in project development and then also in reviewing pre-applications.
Hey, everyone. This is Kyle. Great job. Not sure how you talked for that long. So, good job getting the water. I would have given you more time, but welcome everyone. I scrolled through some of the names and I do recognize many in previous conversations, but good to see some folks I don't recognize. I understand there are some past applicants, but of course, we're always looking for new ones. So yeah, the pre-application process and follow up on last year's, we're a pretty small shop, so we're trying to get to everybody as we can. We have some requests for follow-ups from last year, and I've reached out to many, and I'm trying to find some time over the next week or so to talk to folks who may not have been successful last year. Traditionally, we've, I think as was mentioned earlier, NBRC has been an infrastructure program. 40% of that funding, federal funding, has by statute is required to go to infrastructure. So in previous years, since we've grown from our start in 2010, I think, when we first got money, we've grown from looking at that priority for infrastructure in our scoring. When in the past, we've done probably 60 to 70, 80% of our projects in New York have been for infrastructure. We're trying to broaden that umbrella to get to other projects that are consistent with the NBRC 7 goal areas. Some of NBRC scoring changes from last year and this year going forward have the focus on underserved areas and modifying the infrastructure definition have helped with that. And last year, while we did fund, most of our projects again were infrastructure, a lot of those were more the community infrastructure type projects like daycare and other things that NBRC has expanded its definition to include an infrastructure as assets and things that are needed for communities in our region to be competitive. So, but I'll just scroll through I don't think you have our scoring. Oh, you do? Okay, great. I pulled up last year's manual. It hasn't changed too much. Hey, Helen, how are you? I see your question came up. That'll be answered in the past by the NBRC staff. So as Adrian mentioned, as with the pre-app process, so we want to look at projects that we don't want applicants to apply if they're not eligible, of course, but also if they're likely not to be too competitive. Last year, we invited most applicants back for application. This year, we may tighten it up a little bit, but it's a good way to get to lay your project out before application. But the things that we look at, and then last year NBRC, and before last year, NBRC's 50 points were allocated to the states to score. Last year, NBRC decided, and probably supported by us, to make this a regional partnership in the scoring as well, and they review full applications based upon their criteria, and then the states are given the other half of the points to review applications based upon what we see as priorities. So in New York, we want to look at financial need. That means how critical is the funding to the completion of the project, and how significant is that share of the project cost. So I use the example of large scale infrastructure projects where, our $500,000 or $1 million for infrastructure, of course, is critical. Folks wouldn't ask for it if it wasn't needed, but if it's $1 million, maybe on a $30 million grant project, how you know, are we that critical piece? Whereas we might be more critical to a $500,000 infrastructure project. We are more critical probably to a $500,000 infrastructure grant in $1 million project. So that's our first review criteria. And then how significant is the need to the community and the community impact? Those of you that are on the call, I would venture to guess that 100% of you are aware of the Regional Economic Development Councils. We don't ask the councils necessarily to review our projects. We want to make sure that what we're funding is consistent with the strategies that are being developed by those councils. So if you can get a letter of support from the either regional director of ESD or the council co-chair, that's great. If a project is listed specifically in this RADC strategy, that's something that we like to see as well. We're trying to promote development in downtowns and existing community centers, as well as areas that are defined by growth by applicants. So, you know, downtowns are different everywhere. You know, I'm sitting in downtown Albany looking out my window. Downtown Albany is a little bit different than downtown Lake Placid, but what we want to try to invest in are places of existing development and planned future growth. So if you can show the project as an objective in a local government's comprehensive plan, that's positive as well. Sustainability, we ask about project sustainability and how clearly there's evidence that the project is sustainable, and you have identified clear and long-term measurable goals. If the application is unclear on those things, then it won't score as well. Regional impact, if projects have impacts across multiple counties, that is the highest scoring, and then multiple municipalities. We want, you know, our program sits within the Division of Local Government here in New York, and we're big on cooperative services and sharing services. So if that's if you can show that, that's positive. And then we talk about workforce development, supporting new approaches to support workforce and business development in areas of emerging opportunity. Community infrastructure, I talked about that a little bit before, sort of your non-traditional infrastructure type projects. And again, you're probably thinking, well, how does a workforce project impact infrastructure? Well, it may not, but the benefit of the NBRC program, and sometimes we struggle with the fact that the program itself can fund many things, but we try to prioritize where communities are and try to figure out and have folks apply to us for those strategic needs they have to sustain development or produce new opportunities for citizens and residents of their communities. So the last two things we look at are again, workforce and other types of infrastructure critical to the community. And then we also, our last scoring factor is, you know, sometimes when we set out these priorities, they sound good, but we might miss something. So we want to look at just the general significance of the project meeting New York State priorities. And those will include the geographic distribution of grants. So you saw the map. Our NBRC program in New York starts in Sullivan County, goes north to Clinton County, and then on the eastern side starts all along parts of the Hudson River and Lake Champlain, and then goes all the way out to the Great Lakes. So we are huge. We grew in 2018, the size of New York's footprint for the commission doubled. So, you know, we want to make sure these resources are being allocated as geographically as possible. The uniqueness of the project, when reviewed against other applications, the ability of the project to serve as a model for future projects, and then the impact of current regional statewide initiatives. So someone mentioned the DRI. I saw the application question or the chat question. For NBRC folks, the DRI is a downtown revitalization initiative. It's a state program where communities can compete amongst our 10 economic development regions for grants of $10 million. So from our perspective with the NBRC, that's state dollars. So that could count as match for a project. Actually, the DRI folks are right on our floor, so I'm not sure if there's any restrictions going backwards. I can find that out, but those are state dollars for community development. So, and I think I don't have all, the list of all the projects in my head, but I'm sure we've done projects that are consistent or directly supported by DRI. So that's our stuff. Again, thank you to the NBRC staff who sort of lead this for the 4 states and have developed a really interactive application process, which makes it easy for the states to react to and use. Provides us more work, but that's fine. We don't mind it. I think that's all I have, Adrian.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kyle, for giving a little color to the New York priorities. And let's keep going. We may have some questions after we're done with the webinar slides. So if you guys have questions for Kyle, feel free to use the chat box or get ready to share them in a couple minutes.
Just one point, just so
sure.
folks know, how competitive it can be. Last year we had about 70. New York, you can probably guess by its size. I think we lead the number of applications that are submitted. I think we had about 70 last year, and we were able to fund 15 or 17. So it's very competitive. So just for folks' information.
Good note. Yes. Highly competitive. Oops. Okay, so now we're at the stage where NBRC and the state of New York have completed their review of the pre-applications using those priorities we've gone over and using the points of eligibility we've gone over. And now it's time for us to respond to the pre-applications. So you will likely hear one of 3 responses. The first is an invitation to apply. So this will come with instructions for the application phase, as well as any feedback that may be available from Kyle or NBRC on the pre-application project. The second response may be a recommendation to resubmit in a future funding round with any feedback that may be available for your project to strengthen your project for a future pre-application. And the third response may be an ineligibility determination. Hopefully, we've gone over all of the eligibility factors enough times that we don't have to issue any ineligibility determinations. But if that is the case, that we will include, the reason for that ineligibility. So you can expect to hear those responses again during the week of March 25th. And what's next for you to do as an interested applicant? Go back, take a look at those eligibility factors, self-classify your project and the associated award maximum, self-evaluate your project against the NBRC priorities and the New York priorities, just to give yourself an idea of what you're looking at in terms of the competitiveness for your project. And if needed for further discussion, reach out to your state program manager, to Kyle, or if you have questions about any of the eligibility or how a project would be classified, you can reach out to NBRC. And what's next for us? I saw quite a few questions in the chat box about the grants management system and about the updated guidance for the pre-application. So we are actively working on creating the guidance for the grants management system. actively working on getting that system open to you. And we will be also providing some time so that you guys can come ask your questions about the grants management system. If you're having any technical issues with the system, we'll be making tech support resources available. So stay tuned. That is coming likely at the end of this month. And in terms of the updated Catalyst program user manual, with that part 2 focused on the pre-application requirements and guidance, we are again in the process of updating that right now, and that should be out. Our goal is by the end of next week. So check our website again at the end of next week, and that updated user manual should be there. We will be making the slides, the recording, and the Q&A available today on our website. So that will be there later this afternoon. And we made it to the questions. We've got 5 extra minutes for some more questions. I did just want to know, if you do have questions for NBRC, the best place to send them after today is to our admin@nbrc.gov email address. But with that, I will open the floor. If anyone would like to raise a question, feel free to raise your hand and come off mute.
Adrian, I will note that, obviously people have very specific questions about their specific project, and a lot of times it's not super easy for us to give a detailed answer because we don't have the details we would need to answer. So like you said, that emailing us at admin would be super helpful, because then you can provide the detail that we would need to then provide you an accurate answer. So, we're totally on board to help out and get you the answers you need. But sometimes we just need a little more detail because each project is so specific.
Yes, and again, welcome you to use that email address, like Sarah was just saying, so that we can get you those detailed answers if we can. Someone just asked for Kyle's contact information. Here's all of our contact information, and Kyle's is there too.
I think we did a
This is
pretty
a
good job of
go ahead.
answering. I was just going to say, I think we did a pretty good job of answering the questions in the chat. But again, if you asked a question in the chat and you feel like you still need some clarification, now would be a good time, or again, the email.
Well, I appreciate everyone taking the morning. You're a quiet bunch. Maybe you didn't have enough coffee today. But we are here to answer questions after today. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And yeah, just end by saying thank you. And we really appreciate you taking the time and having interest in NBRC and the Catalyst program. Okay, thank you, and reach out with any questions.